Welcome everyone. I'm so glad to have you all here. My name's Cynthia Napek. I'm the president of the Leadership Louisville Center. And I wanted to get us started with just a little bit about what's going on at the Leadership Louisville Center. So that all of you that are with us today who are our alumni, you can pencil some things in on your own calendar, and also so that you can be an ambassador and help us welcome other people and spread the word about the things that are coming up at the Leadership Louisville Center. But then also I wanted to give a shout out to all the folks who are with us today that are our guests. We do have quite a few people joining us that are new to the Leadership Louisville Center. One of the things that is exciting about this, the necessity being the mother of invention, and the way that we've pivoted and shifted in this time of Corona is that by making these sessions virtual, we are able to meet a lot of new friends, and we're able to improve access to the center. And that's actually one of the things that was really important to us in our strategic plan. So we're excited to be able to connect with more of you. For those of you who are new to the center, our purpose is really focused on how do we inspire and equip more leaders to be better and to do better. So Inspire is all about how we connect you with the things that are going on in our community, like the history of our community. And Equip is all the things that we do to help us skill up and make sure that when we lead in our community, we show up as the very best version of ourselves. So how we do that, how we're focused on that, is in two different paths. The first is all the things that the Leadership Louisville Center does to help strengthen the social fabric of our community, to connect the leaders, to connect the information. That's what we're doing with our Thought Leadership series, what our friends at Baird are helping us make possible for you. Today we've got Dr. Tom Owen, but I wanted to let you know that the next one coming up is Ashley Watts. Clearly, with all of the challenges right now, a strong economic recovery for Kentucky is mission critical. And Ashley Watts is relatively new in her role as the president and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber. I think it will be very interesting for you all to come listen. I also think it will be very important for us to get behind the Chamber, the Kentucky Chamber, the GLI, and all the leaders that are moving us forward. The other way that we do this is by that whole piece of how we equip leaders to serve. And one of the things that we're excited about, again, as I mentioned in our strategic plan, we had really talked about access. And it's important to us to make sure that we can increase the numbers of leaders in our community who are equipped to lead with confidence and with courage. How we do that is by making investments in ourselves. And our new series, our micro-learning series, is all about that. They're small bites, they're free, and they're virtual. So it helps us be able to have the Leadership Louisville Center impact more people across our community. And our next one coming up is Justin Patton. If you need a dose of energy, I promise you, Justin will bring that on May 19th. He is a great personality. He's a lovely thought leader, and we're excited to have him coming up on May 19th. On May 29th, Leading with Grace During a Pandemic. I'm personally kind of excited about that one. I think that's one that we can all. So that one's coming up on May 29th. And then we're excited to be able to get back into some of our regular programming as well. The Green Room programming is, I think, more important now than ever, as our leaders are being challenged to lead in new and scary ways, in new and exciting ways. The way that we help people show up as the best version of themselves is to make sure that they have those investments in their own leadership skills and traits. Self-leadership and the 1 Minute Manager is an offering that we're doing in partnership with the Blanchard companies. It is virtual, so everyone can come check it out. We were very specific in choosing the Blanchard companies because they've been doing virtual for a very long time. I think they are a national best practice in this. So I definitely want to make sure folks know about this. If you have ever had one of those moments where you're like, if I could just have a bunch of self-motivated self-starters on my team, life would be so much better. You need to send everybody to this one. Because being self-motivated and a self-starter isn't just something that people are born with. There are actually tools and techniques that we can teach people that give them the confidence to be that kind of person, to show up as that kind of person for you and your company. So we've got that coming up. And then, yay! One of our favorites is our Wise Women series. And we'll kick that off June 24th with Ingrid Hernandez. We've got some fun surprises up our sleeve, so you're gonna want to be there for this one. We're working on our capacity to incorporate our social distancing and our virtual and all those good things that Governor Andy wants us to do. Spectacular, and I think everybody is ready for a little bit of a deeper connection. So that's coming up. All this great stuff at the Leadership Louisville Center. Last but not least, our flagship program, the Leadership Louisville class. Applications are open right now through May 22nd. The class doesn't start till August, but application window is narrowing. So if you know someone who wants to be, and we always tease every class thinks they're the best class ever, right? All of my alumni out there, yes, I know, right? It's you. I'm pointing directly at you. It's your class is the best class ever. This class could potentially be one of our most important classes ever, though, because a lot of good people to rise up and lead us right now. So all of that going on. We need great alumni ambassadors to help us spread the word and help us connect with more and more people so that we can increase our impact in the community and have wonderful leaders who step up to serve the greater good. Speaking of those wonderful leaders who step up to serve the greater good, it is my pleasure to introduce you all to the Vice Chair of Baird, Jim Allen. Jim has an impressive track record as a leader who has stepped up to serve the greater good. He has chaired boards and served on committees. He is a roll up his sleeves and get the job done for the community kind of guy. He has raised a ton of money for a lot of worthy endeavors that help our community grow. He is a fine exemplar of the people at Baird and their commitment to community. And so I would love to kick it over to Jim to do our official introduction of our speaker today.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Cynthia, what a great menu and array of programs, and where there's everything leadership in there somewhere. And Leadership Louisville does such a wonderful job of serving our community, and especially appropriate to talk about all of that when we focus on Louisville today. So a great asset to our community. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Congratulations to you and your team for, again, delivering on such a big way for this community. As it relates to Baird, we are still working diligently, strategizing around how do we want to return to the workplace in a very thoughtful and safe way. Client safety, the safety of our colleagues is first and foremost. So we're working on how to get that accomplished as everyone starts to turn their attention to return to work in a more traditional way. Of course, nothing will be exactly like it's been. There will be masks, hand sanitizer everywhere, and other personal protective equipment to ensure that everyone stays safe. But thought, an increasing thought, is being given to that return to work sort of process. Also want to acknowledge, as you look at the Louisville skyline, the signage on the top of our building at 500 West Jefferson is in the process of being changed. And you'll notice Baird signage replacing the Hilliard signage. And so we're excited about that. Obviously, it's allowed us to keep some individuals gainfully employed in a safe way as they've made that signage change. It's happening this week. And also the fact that downtown sidewalks are not as occupied. It's also been actually good timing from our standpoint, because we do take up a lot of space in order to make that that happen, but I would like to draw your attention to that signage. Also want to acknowledge the fact that the Hilliard Lyons Trust Company, now known as just Hilliard Lyons Trust, a Baird company, that signage on Fifth Street has already been changed. It's the eyebrow signage as you come off of Fifth Street into that entrance to our building. So we're excited to make these changes, excited to move forward. Of course, Baird shares the same interest in community, a commitment to community that Hilliard Lyons has a great legacy of having over the years. So we've stepped up to support a number of local causes as we go through sort of this pandemic and its impact and try to support those with tremendous need. So we're proud to be part of that and continue that legacy of community commitment. And so while we're on the topic of talking about community commitment in Louisville and what a great place it is, we are very fortunate this morning to have Dr. Tom Owen with us. Dr. Tom Owen is truly a Louisville treasure. He is a noted historian. He captures the essence of the city like no other in his tours that are lively, funny, poignant, and informative. Dr. Owen has been a professor and historian at the University of Louisville for 42 years and previously served as a member of the Louisville Metro Council and Board of Aldermen. Leadership Louisville Center believes that to understand where Louisville is going, it's important to know where we came from. Tom has helped share the city's history with Focus Louisville classes since 1985 when the program began. He's also a regular presenter for Leadership Louisville classes. He is truly like no other, and we're thrilled to have him take us on a virtual tour through some of Louisville's history this morning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Owen. Tom, it's all yours. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Jim. I'm here, and I've seen you join the meeting, and I recognize a lot of folks out there. It's really good to be with you. Welcome, in this case, to our dining room. But we're going to be, with our imagination and a few visuals, we're going to move on a virtual tour. I would call it hopscotch. It's not a leisurely stroll because we're not going to be focusing so much on nuance and subtlety, but we're going to be broad brushing some aspects of Louisville history. So come on, let's get out there and get to stirring and seeing what we can find. Here's the first point I would love to make. Louisville is a river city. Now that's an accident of geology. The last major glacier, the Ice Age, pushed down with the glacial outflow, formed what we now know as the Ohio River. And in that 981-mile length of the nation's second fullest river, there is only one major natural obstruction, and that's the falls of the Ohio. Now, what you see on the screen is a little bit distorting because generally speaking, historically and naturally, the Falls of the Ohio was much more like a whitewater rapids than like the massive kind of descent of water that you see on that. You know why that is? What you're seeing is a 1927 navigation and hydro dam, but it was built just above the falls or the whitewater rapids of the Ohio. That's not to say that when there was enough water crashing and bouldering and through those boulders, fizzing, spewing, spraying, that's not to say that you wouldn't see a whitewater rapid, you certainly would. But the fact is, we are a city that is on a mighty, mighty river. 606 miles downstream from Pittsburgh, where the Allegheny and the Monongahela form the mighty Ohio River. 606 miles downstream as a river looks like a snake from an airplane. The river descends at the rapids, 26.5 feet in 2.5 miles as it bubbles, turbos, and fumes and sprays, and forms both the north and the west boundaries for our city. That means that the rapids makes a virtual 90-degree turn as it goes around our city. both on the north and on the west. And so in the upper left-hand corner of your map of Louisville and Jefferson County, there is that mighty rapids. And so it is that we are a city that is shaped by the Ohio River, both historically and geographically. Now look, do you think Indianapolis or Lexington would arm wrestle us for the river? I suspect they have, because they have almost had to imagine water, either in a gigantic fountain in downtown Lexington, or by damming up a little creek-like thing in Indianapolis and calling it a river. So we are fortunate to have it, that mighty river that shapes our city. But there have been issues with the river. She will come up on cat's feet, rising during flood times. And so now we hide behind a 29-mile-long wall, a flood wall. But nevertheless, that river forms our heart. It is our beautiful river. It is our place that we can go and gather and find our identity as a river city. That flood that I mentioned, the worst in history, was January, February 1937, when 2/3 of the inhabited parts of our city were ankle deep or over your head in icy, muddy floodwater in virtual total darkness, except in those areas that escaped the flood. And so therefore, built into our psyche, built into our DNA, as it were, there is a resignation and a resilience and a hope that transcends, because historically, we know what it's like to wash the mud out of the sugar bowl that sits above the sink after the flood. So then, we are a river city. So then how did we begin as a city? Well, we began as a city as an act of military necessity. For you see, we were in the darkest days of the American Revolution. And Governor Patrick Henry of Virginia knew how important it was to try to protect the vulnerable underbelly of what was then a colonial revolution, with the British, Mother England, British soldiers and their Native American allies poised on the other side of the Ohio River in forts, small forts, Kaskaskia, Cahokia, Vincennes, Fort Detroit. And so George Rogers Clark was commissioned by Governor Patrick Henry of colonial Virginia in Revolution to come to the Falls of the Ohio and to build a fort to defend against attack from the British and their Native American allies. Did you see that 150 or so soldiers on a flotilla of flatboats coming down the Ohio River? What did you see? How could it be? There's wash on the front of the deck, hanging by ropes. I hear kids. I see moms. This is a military expedition. For reasons that we do not know, that military expedition that came to the Falls of the Ohio to defend against British and Native American attack was accompanied by at least 60 civilians, moms, kids, brother-in-law, preachers, adventurers, and one African-American slave. They landed on Corn Island, which was a 70-acre island that we have an image of Corn Island that you might be able to see on the screen, that they settled on Corn Island. One more image forward. And we don't see Corn Island, but that's fine. Corn Island was 70 acres. I'll tell you where it was, closer to the Kentucky shore, at the end of 12th Street. Does that make any sense to you? Well, that's where George Rogers Clark settled the soldiers and the civilians. And very early in that late May of 1778, George Rogers Clark pulled a set of secret orders from his pocket and announced to the volunteer militias, the militia that had accompanied him, "Gentlemen," he said, "I'm authorized to attack." No, wait a minute. I thought this was a defensive operation. To attack the British-held fortresses. The fortresses in the Northwest, it was called, Indiana and Illinois. And some of the Patriot soldiers started swimming for shore. But Clark rounded up enough, and he attacked the British-held fortresses Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes. Only reason I tell you this is to talk about Louisville's beginning. But I also tell you that Clark, by invading the Northwest and conquering those forts in 1778 from Corn Island, essentially pushed the boundary of the emerging United States from the Ohio River to the Great Lakes. What's this mean to you? You don't have to go across an international boundary to go to New Albany or Jeffersonville. Essentially, you are looking at Canada if Clark had not pushed the emerging boundary of the United States to the Great Lakes. So then, we were born in 1778 as an act of military necessity with George Rogers Clark on Corn Island. Hey, there are some folks that you know their names, and those names come from the earliest days of our city. For instance, our namesake, King Louis XVI. He stands as a statue there on the corner of 6th and Jefferson. George Rogers Clark left Corn Island, and very quickly they left Corn Island, climbed to a place on shore, and then very quickly, by 1781, by the way, they ended up next to the Leadership Louisville Center, which was at the receiving end of the Wilderness Road, next to Leadership Louisville. They're at Fort Thomas Nelson Park. But we are named for a French king. Wait a minute. A French king? We're fighting against our own George King. And we don't like kings. Not so much, I think. We think that a bishop, a priest, a pope, a leader of the church should not be able to put a hand on someone's head because their DNA is special. So we're not comfortable with kings over here, generally speaking. But nevertheless, this city is named for King Louis XVI. How'd that happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happened. We were in a bind. Our derriere in the darkest days of the American Revolution, 1778, was in a deep crack. And so our military political leader, George Washington, sent old Ben Franklin to see a French king in his palace outside Versailles. That's Paris, France. I mean Versailles. And Benjamin Franklin, in my imagination, knocked on the king's door. And in my imagination, the king came to the door, looked through the slot in the door. You and I both know that kings don't go to their own door. But it's my imagination. And King Louis XVI of France saw the petitioning Benjamin Franklin, who had come to ask for help. He saw Ben Franklin and said, "Franklin, are you tied up with those local revolutionaries in America who don't like kings?" "Yes, you're just ribbon. Get off my front porch," King Louis XVI hollowed through the door. But Benjamin Franklin pushed closer to the door and said, Your Majesty, you do remember who we're fighting against. That king who hated and feared revolutions hated only one thing more: England." And so the big door at Versailles opened. And when Benjamin Franklin left, he had a signed copy of the Franco-American Spaghetti Alliance of 1778, the very year that we started out on Corn Island. in which the French king agreed to send guns, to send military leadership, to send assistance in the diplomatic capitals of Europe. And when we heard the word here at the Falls of the Ohio that the French king was sending help, we kicked up our heels with joy. And instead of naming this place Falls of the Ohio, or Bear Grass after a creek that used to empty into the Ohio River beside the Belle Louisville, instead of naming it those things, we kicked up our heels and we briefly started speaking French. We named this place Louis. Hit the space bar on the computer, will you? Give me a French word. Ville, the town of Louis XVI, King of France. That's how we got named for a French king. Does anybody know the French king's family's last name? Some of you have been on my tour and you know the answer to this. Shh, for those of you that don't. What's the French king's family's last name? I'll make it sound French, but I don't know French. Famille du Bourbon. All the French kings had the same family name in that era. Bourbon. And baby step removed once, twice, three times. All the corn whiskey we make in the Commonwealth of Kentucky today is named for the French king's family. Bourbon. Anybody know the symbol of the Bourbon Kings? Oh, I know. I do look a little like a fleur de lis, because that's the symbol of the French kings. Look, it's on his robe. I can see it almost on that slide. And so the fleur de lis was the symbol and became our symbol as a city in 1948. Painful footnote. The French king, who hated and feared revolutions, but hated only one thing more, lost his head to that highly mechanized head removing machine that was created by Dr. Guillotine and served killing so many people during the French Revolution, 15 years after the French king had assisted us. He was beheaded by Dr. Guillotine's head removing machine. And so we are named for, who's the other person that we're named for? Watch my fingers, watch my fingers. I'm fooling you. I'm fooling you. Our county is named for our governor, Thomas Jefferson. What? Long before Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States, he was our governor, but not the governor of Kentucky. There was a Native American region, there was a county in Virginia, but we began as Virginians. And when we, as a community, as the little frontier Falls of the Ohio community, now called Louisville, that community was named for our governor, Thomas Jefferson. In 1780, our community was still in training camps. Our government, that had just moved up the James River from Williamsburg to Richmond, Virginia, created 3 new counties west of the Allegheny Mountains in what was then Virginia. The one was named Marquis de Lafayette County. You know what the county seat of Marquis de Lafayette County is? Big Blue, Lexington. They just got tired of using the name of the French general who was assigned to come and help us in our revolution. But Marquis de Lafayette County is now called simply Fayette County. The other county was named for a Massachusetts Revolutionary War general by the name of Lincoln. Stanford is the county seat of Lincoln County. And the third county was named for the governor that signed the charter in 1780 that created the county, named for him, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, that complex idea guy, that complex leader guy, that ambiguous person who fathered at least several children by his willing or unwilling slave companion, Sally Hemings. The words of Jefferson, by the way, are cut into the granite of that statue that you see on the screen, and they are powerful. He wrote something in 1779 called The Treatise for the Diffuse of Knowledge. And you know what the idea simply was? That if we are moving towards some kind of participatory government, we've got to get smarter. And so he believed that the state ought to be providing quality education to educate its citizenry in the effective exercise of the ballot. He had many other good ideas as well, including how to balance religion in an emerging democratic state. So we are named for Thomas Jefferson, our governor. Well, what else can we say? We are a city historically that is shaped by immigration. Yuppie. In the period from 1840 to the late 1850s, just before the Civil War, we are a city that experienced massive European immigration. African Americans as slaves, and some few as free men and women of color, limited in their civil rights. But the rest of us were white and mostly hailed from England or the British Isles. But then outsiders came in massive number. Germans, German Protestants, German Jews in smaller numbers, and massive numbers of German Catholics speaking a different language and hailing not American Protestantism, but American Catholicism. 2-to-1 German immigration over Irish immigration, and almost all of the Irish who came in the 1840s to the late 1850s were Irish Catholics. The result was that by the late 1850s, it is believed absolutely that 1 out of 3, and probably more, as many as 40% of Louisvillians were not born in America, but were foreign born. And yes, you're right. It created significant political and cultural tensions between the Protestants and the Catholics, between the nativists, those of us who were already here, and those who were foreigners, immigrant, newcomers. And so it is that the passions of politics and culture boiled over in one of the very painful days of Louisville history. On August 6, 1855, following confusion and delays, the party in power who resisted the newcomers, they held very few polling places. And so the lines got too long and there was pushing and shoving, and some spark ignited rioting. And nativist rioters on Bloody Monday, August 6, 1855, ran through East downtown in what we would now know the area of the hospital area and the medical school area, where many German immigrants were. St. Martin's Church is a classic example. And they also rioted and ran wild and rampant west of downtown in an area, for instance, along Main at about 10th or 11th, where this marker is. And that is an area of Queens Road, and they rioted, burning, pillaging, raiding, killing. At least 22, some estimate 100, were killed in the riots of August 6, 1855. And I do not want to underestimate the tension that existed at that time. Political dislocation, cultural suspicion, all led to August 6, 1855 and the Bloody Monday riots. But remember, we transcended. We moved on. We healed. And we created a city of today. Well, we're a city that was fueled by immigration. And that was very important, shaped by immigrants. In addition to that, and this is one of the most complex pieces of Louisville history that I can talk to you about. And this is so difficult to put your finger on. Let me pose it this way. Louisville was a southern city? Well, if you measure whether slavery existed here, it did. We had strong, too many slave markets that sold human flesh and transported it by river to the growing slave markets in the Southwest. And so it is that we were a city that was a slave city. In fact, one of the ironies, if you stand, say, on 6th Street and look toward the Ohio River and see trees on the other side of the river, if a slave, a runaway slave, despite federal legislation that provided bounty to slave catchers, fugitive slaves, but if you could get across the Ohio River, aided by an underground railroad, which is more than anything else a wagon with straw over human flesh, seeking freedom in the north. But that was the beginning of a route that would take you toward freedom. So it is, we were a southern city because we were a slave city. Hey, wait a minute. But when the Civil War broke out in 1861, get this, Kentucky did not secede from the Union. Neither did Missouri. Neither did Maryland. Neither did the slave state of Delaware. We all remained border slave states. Now in Kentucky, there was briefly a rump Confederate government of Kentucky, but believe me, it was a very minor blip. In fact, when you consider this Union state in the Civil War contributed 3 to 1, 2.5 at least, to 1 Union recruit over Confederate recruits from Kentucky. So we were a predominantly Union state during the Civil War in recruitment. And so it was that in that sense, we remained loyal to the Union, and so we were a northern state, or at least a Union state. But then after the Civil War, oh, by the way, of those 2.5 to 1 recruits to the Union Army vis-a-vis the Confederate Army, a portion of those were African-American slaves who after January 1864 could move into freedom, leaving the plantation and joining the ranks of the Union Army. But after the Civil War, and this is the painful notion, after the Civil War, I give you an example on the screen. The daughters of the Confederacy, the daughters of the Confederate soldiers, the minority, erected, among other things, a monument in the middle of 3rd Street at U of L, a Confederate monument with a soldier standing on top, pointing defiantly with its arms toward the north. There was no Union War monument in Louisville, and only, I think, one in the entire Union state of Kentucky. So what happened? I think this monument is a symbol of what happened. What happened is that we made an accommodation, and I'm looking at my own skin, my race made an accommodation. The Unionists and the Confederacy, the Union soldiers and the Rebellion soldiers, the whites, they joined in an ultimate coalition of progress to move the state forward, to get over the bitterness of the Civil War, brother against brother. And the whites came to a consensus, progress and future. And in the process, marginalized the former slaves, free men and women of color, and limited massively their opportunities. They were marginalized, and though free in the post-Civil War era, were by way of Jim Crow laws, they were marginalized to a serving class. And there was a ceiling that was very, very close, a very low ceiling of opportunity. Jim Crow law was always, by the way, contested, but the voice of the African Americans and their allies were generally silenced. And so we were able to get Supreme Court decisions of separate but equal. We were able to segregate the public parks in Louisville in 1924. We were able to get red line legislation through the banks. And so all of these things basically put a lid of opportunity for African Americans. But through the years, there were allies, there were visionary African Americans, there was resilience and determination, and moving into our own time, a move toward progress. So was Louisville a southern city, fed and nourished by much of the Midwest and the streams of culture there, but nevertheless because we were a slave state, and because we kind of adopted a southern patina, especially among the whites. The Kentucky Colonel, who is he? I suspect he is a slaveholder on a magnolia-covered veranda in the Bluegrass region, or at least initially. So it is. I guess we're a southern city. So what have I said? Let's kind of look back real quickly. I've said that Louisville is a river city, all right. That means our wharf has been open to a whole lot of different folks. A whole lot of people coming to our front door. We are a city that began as an act of military necessity during the darkest days of the American Revolution. We're a city named for a French king and a county named for Thomas Jefferson, who never came to see us, but I in my heart know he loved us. In addition to that, we are a city that was created. Why is it when you drive through old Louisville neighborhoods, you see so many Gothic ornate churches? It's because of that German, Irish Catholicism that influenced so much of our culture. And you can imagine the political challenges historically here in this city between Protestants and Catholics, some of which come down even to our own time. And then finally, we are a southern city. Well, in closing, I want to say simply this. The hand of history is on our shoulder. The beauty, the ugliness. But we're not puppets on a string. We can learn. We can listen from our past. We can be informed and nourished by it. And at times appreciate the story. But even more than that, by listening and learning, we can meet coming toward us our better angels that move us toward community, that move us toward unity, that move us toward open communication and dialogue. And I suspect that the Leadership Louisville Center is a nexus, an incubator for that kind of meeting and coming together. I am so happy that you walked with me, broad brush, through Louisville history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was, as always, I enjoy I would sign up to take your history class any day of the week. But I want to make sure that we get some questions in. So yes. I'm going to direct people to the chat and have folks pepper their questions into the chat, and then I'll bounce them your way. And Tom, I'll say they're starting to come in. So probably if the shorter your answer, the more questions.
Okay, I'll give them short if I can. I'll make them short if I can.
All right. So the first one is about, they want to know about the Riverside slave market. And can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the starting of that in our community?
Slavery was here from the beginning. The first street corridor from Maine southbound. There were slave plantations in Jefferson County that was as much as anything breeding farms for the birth and raising of slaves. And so it is that they are very much, that fact is very much part of our history. I don't know, I would think there would not be Riverside slave markets, auction blocks, small prison areas where slaves were held and then auctioned with bidders standing in front, with auctioneers calling off the best price. But I would not guess they were close to the river itself, but would be up on the high bank. I know there are several historical markers at 2nd and Main, and then at First between Market and Jefferson, where there were recognizable slave markets there.
Got a couple of people who want to know about books. They want your recommendations. A couple, we've got, what are the, best history books about this area? One about specifically the geography. What are your recommendations?
Well, a couple of things quickly. A reference book called the Encyclopedia of Louisville has endless articles on geology, on prehistory, on African-American history, on various topics. Fort Thomas Nelson, for instance, that I mentioned next to the Leadership Louisville Center. So that's a standard. The latest, and this is a long time ago, the latest narrative history, that is photographs, but more than anything, sentences and paragraphs, was George W. Yater, 200 years at the Falls of the Ohio. But that's dated. That's 1978, as I recall. But there have been smaller histories, neighborhood histories, and that sort of thing since then. But just in terms of the broad narrative history of Louisville, there have been aspects of civil rights history, German history in Louisville. These things have been in books, and they're available. But in terms of a broad narrative history, by the way, I'll tell you 2 books I love. And again, they're dated. They're from the earlier 1970s. Samuel W. Thomas did Views of Louisville since 1766, and then Louisville since the 1920s. Those are 2 picture books that I love. I taught my kids on the back of a TARP bus many, many decades ago by just looking at the pictures and myself learning, and they learned as well Louisville history.
So another question about Main Street, Fort Nelson. Can you tell us about like the Science Center building and Leadership Louisville and that block right there? What used to be there? Well,
Main Street has always been the first street. You know what Main Street ought to be called? High Street. Every other European city and many, many Americans have a high street. If they're on a river, it's for the same reason. It's on the second bank of the Ohio River. So not where you park your wagon or your car to go fishing down in the alluvial mud, you'll go up to your axle. So the next street up, safely above the floodplain, or at least the first bank, is Main Street. And Main Street was where the Fort Thomas Nelson in 1781 was. And then they built log buildings along Main Street, and then modest brick buildings, and the warehouse commercial buildings, which were multi-purpose buildings, many with cast iron facades. They are essentially an 1860 to a 1900, 1905 era. And so that's the corridor, the historic West Main National Register District, that preservation district, which starts at 6th Street and goes down to 9th Street. That corridor is warehouse, corporate offices, all in one building for wholesalers, primarily wholesalers. Leadership Louisville building, for instance, is where Fulton Conway was, as I recall. Is that right?
Harbison Gaithright, I think is.
Rattles and harnesses. Tell me the name of the business again.
Harbison Gaithright. I think you told me it was a saddlery company.
And they're still in the transportation merchandise business, but they had begun on Main Street, saddles, bridles, and harnesses. I call them transportation merchants, and I think they're still around.
So next one is about Bug Alley. This is not one I know about, but Neville says, I think it's near Waterfront Park. Is this one you're familiar with?
And it's called what?
Bug Alley.
The Bug Alley. I have seen that name right this minute. Not going to be able to fetch anything out of the old.
You can follow up with Neville later if it pops into your head.
Yeah, Bug Alley. I've seen that, and I've seen it on old maps, but I can't do anything with it.
You mentioned the Southern Exposition, and I think I recall that that is where Thomas Edison
Oh, yeah.
debuted his light bulb. So maybe
Yeah,
you can give us
that
a
was,
little.
again, see, that is yet another symbol of, is Louisville Southern? Because our railroads, 1848, 1850, Louisville and Nashville, it moved into the South. And after the Civil War, we commercially, culturally pushed into the South and hosted in 1883 to 87, basically on Central Park out on 4th Street at Magnolia, and St. James Court, Belgravia Court. That was transformed into a Southern Exposition, where we were essentially promoting Southern agriculture, Southern manufacturing, Southern economic achievement in the era after the devastation of the Civil War in the South. But we were riding the L&N Railroad into that progressive future. And so the Southern Exposition is kind of a symbol of that. But it's also a symbol of that coming together of white folks and marginalizing the African Americans.
So a question about you, Tom. Are you still leading walking tours, and what are ways people can connect with you?
How many Focus Louisvilles are there? 4 or 5 of you? 4?
There are 4.
4. I always do a tour for Focus Louisville, a combination walk on Main down to the Government Center, where you see the statues that we saw this morning. And then we usually do a bus tour into the Northwest and West Louisville, discovering the history of that area. And then I always do tours. I mean, I do them for Girl Scouts in early November. I do them for tourist groups that are coming. I don't do anything commercial. I do it through the University of Louisville, and where I'm still employed, working from home. But I still do, I think I would say, even now that I've slowed down a lot, I do 80 walks, talks, or tours a year.
It's a lot. Okay, we'll see.
Well, it used to be a lot more.
We still got a couple more questions.
I used to do 100 to 110, but I have slowed down a little bit. But no, I still love to do tours, absolutely.
So 9th Street Divide, can you tell us when that started to be recognized as a divide between East and West?
9th Street Divide. 9th Street Divide was intensified, of course, by Roy Wilkins Boulevard and the off-ramp of the Interstate Highway. But west of 6th Street was the beginning of the African-American commercial district. So west downtown, even though it might not, in this case, literally be 9th. 9th is kind of, west of 9th is be a kind of a 1960s, 70s perception. But west of 6th Street is where the old Walnut Business District began. And then it continued with some tenements and residents and commercial district for the racially segregated African-American community with theaters, a couple of banks before the Great Depression of the 1930s, all the way down to about 12th Street. Then, beginning in the 19-teens, African-Americans moved west of 12th into what was formerly generally a white neighborhood, with some African-Americans living in the rear properties. But nevertheless, what we would now call the Russell neighborhood, the beginning of the Russell neighborhood at say 12th, that would have been a white neighborhood. And then from 1910 forward, there's been a pain, historically, painfully, as African Americans moved in, whites fled. I'm hoping that the better angels of our future will welcome us with a much, much different tone.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, and I'm going to do one last question. It's a fun one to end on. You already talked about our Bourbon history.
Yeah.
They want to know how many distilleries were in Louisville pre-prohibition. I don't know if you know the exact number, but maybe you can give us
Well, it's
a
hard to
bourbon
get a
note
hold
to end on.
The key there is distillery versus distributorship. Many, many, many Louisville distilleries might have blended whiskey on Main Street in downtown Louisville, but there were distilleries in what would have then been rural Jefferson County. Pleasure Ridge Park Distillery on Dixie Highway comes to mind. But then there would have been rural Jefferson County distilleries, then rural distilleries in small towns and countryside in Marion County, LaRue County, Anderson County, Franklin County. There would have been distilleries out there, but they would have had a corporate identity on Main Street where they might have blended. I don't believe in downtown Louisville there was a lot of what I would call boiling, bubbling mash tubs with big fires, distilling and evaporating the product. Now, I could be at least 58% wrong about that. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm saying generally speaking, there would have been, let me just give you an example. 1905, if I had looked before, well, now consolidation was beginning by 1900, but basically it would have been larger national distilleries buying out, with many local survivors. But nevertheless, I would say that if you looked for whiskey distilleries, there would have been at least 35. And most of them would have been housed, at least corporately, downtown.
So I want to thank Dr. Tom Owen for not just today, but he is part of our Leadership Louisville family. When we ask alumni what's their favorite thing about their experience, very frequently Dr. Owen comes up as their highlight. And I think part of it is because history is so important for people who want to be good community leaders to understand where we've been so that we can formulate a great plan for where we're going. But I also think it's because Tom is such a amazing storyteller, and you can actually just feel it and see it. And when you tell a good story, we can all ride right along with you on that L&N Railroad and experience it. So thank you for being part of our Leadership Louisville experiential learning team. Thanks to all our alumni who are hanging out with us today. Again, we invite you to be ambassadors, help us make new friends in new places. And for all of our new folks, we welcome you back to hang out with us again. Again, long list of things going on. Our website has always got those posted so you can check them out and forward them around to friends. Thank you to our friends at Baird, Jim Allen and the team there. They're doing great work. Just posted something, I think, on our LinkedIn from Julie White for those of you that are serving on boards right now. Very important that all of our board members have good financial literacy and understand what's going on in our COVID craziness. So we've got some interesting things from that Julie White at Baird helped create for board members, because I know lots of you all are serving on those nonprofit boards. So Baird is a fantastic partner for us. They do wonderful work in advancing community, and we're grateful to have them on the Thought Leadership Series. Thanks, everybody.